Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky, episode 84. I'm your host, Jennifer, and as a reminder, you can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and now on Blue Sky. And we are also on Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to support the show. Today, I am excited to be speaking with Dr. Debbie Saunders, CEO and co-founder of NatureHelm, a company that helps companies assess their impact on biodiversity and the risks associated with that. So, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about your organization. But first, can you talk about a little bit about your background and how you got into this field?
Yeah, sure. My background is in conservation ecology. So ever since I was a child, I've been fascinated by wildlife. And in particular here in Australia, we have very unique wildlife with pouches and all sorts of things that just captured my imagination as a child. So I've always loved being out in wild areas and just observing nature as a whole. And so my whole career has been focused on, trying to protect threatened species. I've worked across a whole range of industries from private sector, like environmental consulting. I've worked in government on threatened species recovery programs, also in research universities. I did my PhD on an endangered migratory bird. And that actually led me into then entrepreneur world of innovative technology for advancing conservation. And so it's biodiversity and conservation have always been at the heart of everything that I've done. And it's now, transformed into me having a business, which, to be honest, I never imagined as throughout my whole career that I would be running a tech business. But this is now my second tech business that I've established. So it's really, it's interesting how, your journey can end up very different to what you envisaged.
Yeah, and I mean, being from Australia, you're kind of spoiled for biodiversity, as you said. And I've only visited once, but when I was there, I was just amazed at how different yet similar it was. And yeah, it's just the unique aspects you have to deal with. So,
Yeah, we're very, very fortunate. We're surrounded by nature wherever we are, pretty much. And I'm based in Canberra, and some people call it like the city of parrots because we have every color of the rainbow in parrots in our backyards. They're just
oh, wow.
stunning, and I get amazed by it every day when I go out for a walk in the morning. It just really lifts my day to just go out there and see the diversity of things that are out and in my backyard and in the local nature reserve.
That's great that it doesn't become mundane, that you're not just, oh, it's just another parrot, that you're still kind of amazed by it. And nature continues to do that for a lot of people, I think. If you learn
Absolutely.
to kind of, you don't take it for granted, and everything is, you realize such a miracle. Like, it's just so cool. Well, I'm excited to talk more about the, I guess, diversity of nature. That's what we're here to talk about today. So I do want to learn more about your company and what you guys are doing. But first, I think it's important that we just talk about what biodiversity is. I'm sure a lot of people have heard this term, but can you give us just kind of an overview of what the heck it is?
Yeah, for sure. It is certainly talked about a lot these days, and it's basically encompasses all species and ecosystems as well as their genetics and the interactions between these, which forms the functional ecosystems that exist in the world. And this is where they are all so interconnected that when we start to impact on habitats in different ways, then you start to break those connections and things that different species rely on. And that's when you start to get a bit like if you have building blocks and you build things up. And if you take one out from down the bottom, which might be like a keystone species, then it's going to have an impact on many other things. So it's all of the life that surrounds us, essentially.
Yeah, and as the more I learn about these ecosystems and how like delicate and intricate they are, it's amazing that nature has constructed this world and that any of us survived, honestly, because like you
I
said, one thing is
know.
removed and the whole system falls, and it's like humans have been causing so much damage over the years that I'm shocked that anything's still around.
I know. Yeah, I have felt the same many, many times, and you just wonder how it's possible that these things can still exist. But then you have moments like when I was taking my kids to school, and I would go inside the gate, and there was a little shrub inside the gate. And I noticed some butterflies that were hovering around the shrub that I hadn't seen before.
Mm.
And so I looked closer and I figured out what the butterfly was. And when I looked at the branches, you could actually see the entire life cycle of this species inside the school gate. And there was the
Wow.
pupae were there were caterpillars there were the butterflies, and there were also these meat ants, which are these super aggressive things that we hate as people because they attack, they bite your kids' toes. But they actually
Yeah.
protect the larvae of the butterfly. And so there's
Oh,
this beautiful interconnected system that can exist
it's
in the middle
symbiosis kind of.
of human, like we have
Wow.
our built environment, and yet these species, this combination of species, has this whole little ecosystem just inside the school gate. So nature is
Mm.
quite resilient if it's allowed to be, if it's given the opportunity.
Yeah, it reminds me of Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, where life will find a way.
Yeah.
Um, So, I know we hear a lot about the problems in the world when it comes to the environment, and the climate crisis is typically kind of the big one that we hear about, right? Like, obviously, we are impacting the climate, and that's having cascade effects on human and non human life. But the biodiversity crisis is also pretty high up there in terms of, problems we're causing. So, can you
Mm.
talk about what is the crisis with biodiversity, and then how the two are interrelated? Because I know climate can impact, the ability of life to function on the planet, but then also life forms, conversely, can also impact the climate for good or for bad.
Yeah, for sure. Well, certainly, like the species that surround us, have all evolved within certain boundaries, and there's often temperature boundaries, rainfall boundaries that make a place really suitable for them to exist, and all those lovely interconnections, like the butterfly and the ants, for example. And so, as soon as these things start to shift, they really start to. Those linkages sometimes can get broken. And to give you an example, I've spent a lot of my career working on these small migratory birds that really depend on flower. So they feed on the flower at the top of a eucalyptus tree, and they migrate thousands of kilometres to find this nectar. From the breeding grounds, they have to migrate north in Australia for the winter, which is a bit of a mind bender for some people in the northern hemisphere because migratory birds usually go south up there. But these birds are looking for nectar across the landscape. And what we are now finding is that there's some really key tree species that produce flowers at the right time and produce large volumes of nectar, really, really important species for many different birds to feed on and insects as well. And what I'm noticing in my local area is these trees are shifting their flowering cycles. And so this tree that normally flowers in winter is now flowering in summer. And so I'm now horrified when I see these trees in flower. I never thought I could be horrified by a flowering tree, but it just is like, oh my gosh, like what will the birds use? What can they find when they migrate 1,000 kilometers to get to my backyard and that tree doesn't have flower when it should? And so you can imagine it's like, driving your car and not being able to fill up at the petrol station. You can only go so far with so much fuel. And if they're unable to find alternative sources of fuel, they just can't go any further. And that's when you start to just see this mass collapse of entire flocks of birds would just disappear out of the landscape. And this is what we see with the species I worked on, which is called the swift parrot. It's now critically endangered, and there's thought to be less than 600 of the individuals of this species left in the wild. And yet every time some of their habitat is removed, it's reducing the capability for them to find that pot of nectar next time that they migrate through an area. So there's all of these shifts, there's breeding shifts, like they need certain conditions to breed well, they need to have all things synchronized, all different parts of their range. So that's just like one example of how one species changing or being removed from a landscape can have massive impacts on entire populations.
Yeah, so the climate is making the trees produce the food later or earlier, depending, and
Yes.
then the animals don't have the food they need, and they have to basically evolutionarily shift thousands of years within a few years, and it's just not
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, exactly. And so, that is quite dramatic, and we're just observing, right? And we don't have we can't provide what they need quick enough. We can only hope
Mm-hmm.
that they can adapt quick enough, and that there are other species that produce the same food that they can rely on. But there are many species that we have already lost, and we are in an amazing country here in Australia, but we also have one of the worst
Mm-hmm.
extinction rates in the world.
Mm.
And so, we need to do a much better job. And we're
Yeah.
continuing to remove habitat of species. And that just compounds these other effects that are being driven by climate change as well.
Yeah, and this is just one species of
Yeah.
millions that exist. I mean, you're seeing it at a very low, small level there, but like multiply that around the world, and then you have real problems. And
Mm,
one thing is gone from the food chain, and then something else can't eat, and then, like you said, just cascades down. Um,
yeah.
it's overwhelming, honestly, when you think about it
It
as
is.
a
It is.
layperson, and I'm sure as a scientist even more.
Especially when I spent most of my career, trying to
I
ensure
know.
this species stays on the planet. And
Mm-hmm.
and I can only, as an individual, I can only do so much. But what I have found really, really powerful is when you reach out and connect yourself with other people who are interested in this as well. So I used to actually run the recovery program and coordinate volunteer surveys right across the eastern part of Australia, for everyone to go out simultaneously and collect data to see whether or not there were swift parrots in a particular area. We did this with BirdLife Australia, so they're continuing their surveys now. This is one of the longest running survey programs in Australia, and
Mm-hmm.
it provides us with amazingly valuable information. In fact, I was asked just today by a government representative for some of that data because they need it for impact assessment. They need to understand where the birds are. So I think that as devastating as it is, and they are still here. And I saw, there's young birds that have migrated up this winter. So some are
Mm-hmm.
still breeding, some are still coming, even though there's massive pressures throughout their range from invasive
Mm-hmm.
species, habitat loss, climate change. What an amazing species that it's still here. And so as long as they still exist, there's hope. And I think we can do something about it to try and optimize the chances of them continuing to stay in the landscape and maintain that functionality. So it is very easy to lose hope, but I think by
Mm-hmm.
immersing yourself in that very thing, and noticing the little things in nature, that's what I use to kind of bring back the hope, in what we can all do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, our team actually went and volunteered on the local nature reserve. We do that on a regular basis as part of our giving back to our local community, and we were helping with some restoration work on the mountain. There were some plantings, and they need to be protected from the kangaroos because they will smash them and break them. So we were
Yeah.
helping to protect them, and then the following week, when I was walking on the mountain in the morning, um, there was this endangered bird that actually was just in one of the little trees that had been planted a few years beforehand. And there's a little nest in there. And so to me, that's like, just gave me a massive boost that someone had done something and not just supported, a whole diversity of more common species as well, but really given that leg up for something that is really on the brink of extinction. You, it can be turned around if you give nature a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it just needs a little protecting. And like I've been doing a lot of volunteering here in Ireland to remove invasive rhododendron ponticum, and nothing here eats it. And so you just have to manually pull it out, and it spreads with flowers. So, like you, I see those flowers and I feel dread because I'm like, no, they're seeding, and they
Beautiful
also
flowers,
spread
but
by
it's
root.
such a frightening thing.
Yeah, I know. But then, you do see, like, once you remove it, you see the growth come back so fast. And I'm not an ecologist, but I have people, that will point out, oh, this is a species we haven't seen in forever, or this is a tree that's coming up that, couldn't have come up because this was here. Now, there are also deer here that eat everything, so you have to kind of, balance that as well. But it is a great feeling to know, like, oh, I helped protect this thing, or at least defend it from something
Yeah.
else. Um, but yeah, like, those kinds of issues happen anyways, and then on top of it, when you have climate impacts, it exacerbates it, like you said. But I've also recently I read this book about, you probably know about this, the Gaia theory or Gaia hypothesis, about how the Earth actually is alive and it can help contribute to Earth processes. So that's kind of another thing that I was fascinated with biodiversity, is how, like, living things can shape the planet and the climate. And I don't know if you have anything to maybe touch on with that, but like, I know when I was in Australia, they talked to us about how the coral can actually control the weather above it to kind of, bring in moisture or clouds and then send it into the rainforest, or vice versa. Maybe I'm getting it backwards, but these systems work together, and it's just incredible. Like, you can have these little microclimates built by living beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this can happen at really small scales as well. I also read an article recently about someone down in Tasmania. It can get really quite cold in the winter, and quite hot sometimes in the summer. And they actually measured different microclimates in grass of different lengths, like in a lawn, right? So you have a completely mown lawn, 1 or 2 centimeters high, then you have a 10 centimeter, then you have a like 30 centimeter lawn. And the
Mm-hmm.
temperature difference was massive between those three different ecosystems, like mini
Just a few
ecosystems that
centimeters.
just leave, like, we mow really long grass here, so now, so it just maintains. And if it's not drying out so much, then you retain the moisture, and then all the biodiversity that's actually in the soil, that actually processes all of the organic matter and gives the nutrients back. Definitely, so it can happen in your lawn, and it can happen at the
Mm-hmm.
scale of forests or coral reefs and these major structures. But we can all contribute to a healthier land wherever we are by nurturing these kind of things, and enabling things to happen at these scales. I think it needs to happen at both. I don't think just doing little things is enough. I think governments also have to drive things
Mm-hmm.
at bigger scales, but together, I think that is always the most powerful outcomes, when you have people on the ground doing things, but you also have governments that are driving change at scale, and as well as businesses now also contributing to that whole picture, that we actually all need to work together on all different levels, and certainly having, restoring vegetation to its natural form is a powerful thing. But whether the species have enough intact connections to surrounding landscapes to enable the species to come back is a key thing. And sometimes we're too slow, and that doesn't enable the natural movement back into an area that is restored. But I have been involved in a lot of programs where they remove invasive species from an entire island, for example, and they then reintroduce the native wildlife. And it was such a wonderful thing. It was one of the most hopeful things I've ever done to help. We were using drones to track animal movements, to look at their survival, from some of the technology that we developed at Wildlife Drones. And what we found was that every single animal was thriving and breeding, and like these tiny little kangaroo-like creatures, they all had pouch young, they were all fat and healthy, and it was amazing to see, because this island, no native wildlife remained, no native mammals, and now it's abounding with them all over the place because they removed the feral predators that were there. So it's all of these different things contribute to the engineering of the ecosystem and the environment in which they exist, and it's a positive feedback cycle. So we have to try and, in my mind, maintain that functionality enough so that we enable nature to bounce back to its full potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes she just needs a little helping hand, and
Yeah.
it's always amazing to me how fast the recovery is, especially like in the oceans. I just
Mm.
keep hearing, when you protect marine areas, they bounce back so fast, and fish stocks, and like from the bottom up, because the ocean is so sensitive, and people are so resistant to it, but it works.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's been some really frightening things here recently with like moving, and people talk about planetary boundaries and the different boundaries that we have to contain our Earth within in order for it to continue to function and to support our life and the life of
Mm.
nature as well. And this ocean acidification is becoming worse and worse all around Australia. We always hear about the Great Barrier Reef and the dieback of the coral from heat stress, etc. But now we are having heat waves and changes in the composition of the ocean all around Australia, and now there are entire ecosystems dying and washing up on the beach in areas that we just have never heard anything like this ever before. So we do need to accelerate doing something, and we all need to contribute to that, so that we don't keep seeing these horrific stories and seeing ecosystem collapse, because once you do start, you get this cascading effect through many different ecosystems, especially the ocean. It's like major driver of all of the weather
Mm.
systems, and the climatic control of the world is driven from the ocean. So it's super important to protect it and look after it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something I wanted to ask about, which is that humans and non-humans, but if we're just thinking selfishly, like we are so reliant on nature for everything. But a lot of people just take for granted that it's there, it's free, it's going to provide for us. So, like, I noticed you all shared on social media a report that stated that over half of the world's economic output is moderately or highly dependent on nature. Can you explain what that means? Like, if for no other reason, like if we don't care about nature for its intrinsic value, why does it matter for us if nature and biodiversity are negatively impacted?
Yeah, and I think and that quote is about things that are highly or moderately dependent on nature, but everyone and everything is dependent on nature at some point. And I do find this an interesting discussion, because especially from a business perspective. So, for example, if you're in an office building in the heart of London, how can I possibly have any sort of influence on biodiversity, or how am I connected to biodiversity? So we've been working with clients in different parts of the world, and one site was in central London, and I loved it because you think of this massive city, and what is there? There are amazing things there. There's invasive species, there's endangered species, there's a little tiny wetland in the canal just nearby on the river,
Mm.
and there's migratory species that we have data from, that migrate from central London all the way down in Western Africa, and come back up again and explore around Europe. And we have all of this amazing interconnected web of life around this tiny little patch in central London. So there's always
Mm.
something nearby, even if you're in the heart of a city. But everyone and every business relies on clean water, for example.
Mhm.
And technology companies and data centers that we all use the internet of, they use massive amounts of water. They need clean water that doesn't destroy their equipment when they're cooling them down, and they're
Mhm.
extracting that water from natural systems. And so anyone who says we're not connected to nature, I think we just need to help them see that everyone relies on nature being intact at some point, whether it be the water that we're drinking, the food that we're eating. So every business has people in it, and those people need to be healthy and need to be functioning in order to work well, and they need good food. And if the food systems if food is being grown in degraded systems, then they're not going to be as nutritious. And then, and the farmers, it just goes right through. So even if you just think about it from food and water alone, we all need those two things. And then if there's a business that is agricultural business, for example, obviously they need pollinators if they're growing crops that have a flower, these sorts of things. And so pollination is I guess, a nice one that most people can relate to, in terms we know that bees pollinate flowers, or many different types of species pollinate flowers, in fact. But if the varroa mite I don't know if the varroa mite is a big problem over your way, but I know it's wiping out bees all around the world, like the European honeybee, and it has actually made it to Australia as well. And so if you think about these key species that are really integral to food production, it threatens food security to not look after
Mm.
biodiversity. And in Australia, obviously, the European honeybee is not native, and we should be harnessing native pollinators and diversifying the pollinators that access the crops. And there's things that people can do to help that along and to build resilience into the food supply chains, but into just the landscapes themselves. Because as soon as an area is degraded, it has flow-on effects downstream. So if you're looking at catchments, you have the water might be degraded up here from some aquaculture production that has some wastewater coming out, and then that has flow-on implications all the way down the catchment. And so everything is interconnected. And so I think if anyone says that they're not dependent on nature, I think they've just not stopped and thought about actually where things come from in their everyday lives. And we have pretty luxurious lives, many of us these days, and so we can feel quite removed. But I, for one, I just feel better if I'm out in nature, and I need it for my mental health just as much as I need it for my healthy food and water as well. So,
Yeah.
I think we need to help people to make that connection and help businesses also make that connection. But it can be challenging when it comes down to a dollar figure. And so, well, how am I going to get benefit from that? Well, you have healthy staff. That's a really good start.
Yeah, and for me, it's like we all need to breathe, right? Like that's the most basic thing is
Mm,
air, and if the air's polluted, and it wasn't that long ago, like in the United States and other parts of the world where our rivers were catching on fire and the air was so polluted, and it still exists in some areas, but like these are things that have major health impacts and major productivity impacts if you're a business, if you're thinking in
mm.
that terms. And to me, it's just a no-brainer. But then again, I'm coming at it from a biased point of view, I guess, for nature.
Yeah, but I mean, even
Um,
like insurance companies know this, right? And so
mm,
they 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 have many forecasting tools and can they know where the risks are lying,
yeah.
and that things need to be done about it. And it was actually the financial sector that set up like the task force for nature related financial disclosures. So there's this sort of framework, if you like, it's a voluntary one, that is was set up to try and help businesses to understand what that interface with nature actually is, and so there are these things set up, and that came about from the financial sector. So there are big businesses that well recognise that these things are
Mm,
very real and impact on everyday life, and you see the premiums that or just the inability to insure now in some areas. They
yeah.
just will not insure you because the risks are too high. It's like we should be paying attention to that earlier, I feel. And that knowledge should be shared, I think, earlier, that is the reality now, of the world that
Right.
we're living in.
Yeah. So much to think about. Wow. And
Mm.
what strikes me about everything you're saying is like, we nature does so much for us, and it's such a delicate system, and we humans come in and we think we can improve it or we can do it better, or we invent these systems like pesticides, herbicides, and machinery and all this stuff that's supposed to be better and more efficient, and it's like it has all these unintended consequences of things that maybe people didn't think would be as bad. They knew it would happen either way, but yeah, it just goes to show you like the brilliance of nature is that the system works. Why are we trying to reinvent it? Why don't we just protect what we have instead of spending tons of money and time on something that doesn't work?
Oh, absolutely. And I do find it a bit, maybe arrogant is the word,
Mm,
when you hear about, oh, we can just transform agriculture and just grow everything in
mm,
a greenhouse in this mechanical,
yeah,
artificial
yeah,
light. We can provide the nutrients and all these things that are needed. And I'm like, really? Like, I think you are underestimating the capability of nature. And we can try, and I think there's, it's good to try and mimic nature because it's brilliant, right? But I think that we need to appreciate that there are some things that are much better to be protected and maintained than to be
hmm
destroyed and then try and rebuild, because you will never get
yeah,
close to millions of years of evolution in terms of the dynamic interactions and getting the full value in terms of nutrients and moisture and all the other things that go with a natural production of something. Yeah, and it's interesting working with clients in the regenerative agriculture space as well, because I now am privy to seeing the data on just the differences between, regenerative agriculture versus normal agriculture, and even just in some initial data from some of these clients, you can see the benefits in the soil, and just the life-giving properties of the soil are greater. So it just makes sense. In the end, it will, everyone will have to do it, because you just won't be able to produce anymore if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I've interviewed a few people that are doing the regenerative ag or something similar, and they're all just like, it's so much less work, it's less money. I'm not having to buy all these chemicals that destroy the soil and then buy more to rebuild the soil. And if you just maintain it from the beginning, it's a little more work up front, but yeah, in the long term, it pays off. And this is what we used to do. Like, we've gone full circle almost, it seems, in a lot of ways. Like,
yeah,
we went
absolutely.
we went over to tech to solve everything, and now we're going back to maybe we had it right, or the indigenous people had it right the whole time.
Absolutely. And actually, one of my staff members was, contemplating this recently, because there's been some massive floods in Australia and in the area where she lives. And she was talking about how when they were speaking to the Aboriginal elders from that area, they were like, we would never set up camp in that area. Like, we know this area floods. Why did you build a town there? Like, if we just listen to the wisdom of the people who know the land, we can all be a lot better off, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with all of this in mind, you're working in this space, so tell me, I guess, about NatureHelm and the work you're doing to address this biodiversity crisis, and maybe why you decided to found this company.
Yeah, sure. So I first started off sort of working in nature tech because I needed to solve the problem of my small migratory bird. Actually, like, I wanted to track its movements. I spent my life kind of figuring out where it goes in the winter range. Other people worked in the breeding range, but we had no idea how it got from A to B to C to D. Like, it just complete mystery, and actually, it still remains such at this point in time. But there was no technology available to be able to track the movements of these small birds over really massive scales. And so we developed some drone sensor technology where you could actually, like, accelerate the searching of areas using drones to get up high and get the signals of the birds, etc. So that started me on this journey of, like, nature tech, if you like. And we've worked with clients across 8 countries now, and that's used on a whole suite of different species, from the Galapagos up into the Canadian wetlands to the forests in Vietnam. So that really showed me that developing new technologies can really open up and provide more opportunities for data to be collected that can help inform how things are managed or protected, etc. And it became evident to me over time that as the global biodiversity framework got signed off, where all the countries around the world were agreeing that, yes, we need to meet these goals, 30 by 2030 goals. And there was a lot of companies that I was speaking to saying, oh, I didn't even know where to begin. Like, how do I account for biodiversity? I'm just wrapping my head around carbon, and now you want me to consider biodiversity? I don't even know what that is, and there's 8.7 million species, right? And so if you're looking, you just had to account for one thing, and now you have to account for 8.7 million of these things, and they all interact. So it's it's quite overwhelming, I think, for companies, and I'm like, well, biodiversity data is what I know and what I have always worked on, and so I feel like I can contribute to this and help companies who want to make a difference and want to be have a positive influence on the world. I would love to empower them with the data and the insights that they need. And I know there's an immense amount of data out there. And this issue is so pressing, and things are on such a downward trajectory. We don't have time to, like, start fresh, if you like. I think we need to really harness the value, maximum value from existing data, and we can always build on that. But let's not just think we have to start from scratch again. Let's leverage what we know. So we ended up, coming up with NatureHelm is a biodiversity data platform that aggregates a really wide diversity of data sources into one place, and then translates that into something that relates to businesses. So, for example, we pull together species records. So, there might be some deer and some bees and worms and all different forms of biodiversity in a particular area from a whole suite of different sources. We pull that together, and then we add information to that about what role does this species play in that ecosystem? What function does it have? What ecosystem services does it provide? And so by linking it to their function, you can then link it to the business, which has operations at a particular spot in the world. And you can say, okay, well, if these are your business operations, and these are the ecosystem services that we know exist right now, it might not be complete, but it's just a snapshot of what we know exists. Then we can then start to show them what are the things that are relevant to their business, most material or important for their business or related to their business. And from that, we can then go, okay, well, what can you actually do about it? What management actions are possible? And how do you monitor these things? And just provide some guidance to enable them to take their first step in the first instance of setting something up, seeing what they're detecting, and then tracking change over time. So you really do need, a lot of regulations have come in as well now. And so some of this is being driven by regulations where they have major companies have to comply. But there's also investors who are becoming increasingly aware of how their portfolios are impacting on nature. So investors are also demanding that transparency around businesses' interface with nature. So we help them actually we can help them create metrics, which is fine, and there's some level of reporting that requires metrics. But what we're most focused on and interested in is helping to create positive change on the ground and helping businesses to embed biodiversity in their business as an everyday thing that they're doing, and enabling them with the data to make good decisions. Is what we're doing working? Like in the regenerative ag case, if the people are doing regenerative ag and others aren't, and then there's natural areas. So our clients will actually take samples from those 3 different management methods, if you like, and then track that over time. And so the natural landscape can sort of provide the goal, if you like, of what you want your regenerative ag to get closer and closer to, and see, is it actually working? Because regenerative ag is a very broad term. There's many different actual management methods within that, whether it be mulching of soil or, reducing or removing pesticide, etc. And so you can actually tease that apart depending on the question and really provide some guidance on whether what you're doing is working. And if not, enabling adaptive management to shift what you're doing to really get evidence that you are actually making a positive change on the ground. So that's we help them visualize all of that in one place, so that they can relate to it and then report on that as well.
So what has been the reaction from business? I mean, have they embraced this new technology, or are they still kind of like, no, this seems like too much? I mean, we're already doing the carbon thing and with all these expectations of us, or I mean, I guess, are there businesses that are embracing this, I guess is my question.
Yes, there are, and it gives me a lot of hope in the world when we're living in quite, turmoil, a lot of turmoil in the world at the moment, in different ways. But in terms of sustainability, there's been some, quite big hits, I guess, to the sustainability movement from some political manoeuvres that have happened, and so I have actually found it to also bring me lots of hope for that. We work every day with businesses who are not, they're leaders basically in their sectors, and they're not doing monitoring and tracking change over time because they want to tick a metric box, although they do need to do that. But what they're most interested in is resilience. They need resilience in their supply chains. Like some of their companies where working with a major retail or luxury goods brands, for example, their supply chains. They want to know that their cotton that's in their products is still going to be able to be produced, and that the people on the ground are actually able to maintain their land and help them to monitor the work that they're doing. And so there are definitely leaders out there. I would have to say that there's a lot of companies that aren't yet at this point, and others that really, at the moment, they just want to tick the metrics box, which is something. It's a start, I suppose, but I think we need to accelerate that. And so, we have asset managers, we have regenerative farming certification bodies that we work with. We're also working with the aquaculture sector. And so when you think about this, and a lot of these initiatives are also not just about nature, but it's about empowering people and enabling people to have a living wage and to have a good quality life. Also being able to produce quality produce that gets a premium price, or just like a price that is worth their while, and being able to look after the land. So when I get to, I have the privilege of looking at that from Africa, throughout Asia, Australia, the US, working all through these areas, and it's a real privilege, to everyone's trying to navigate it and wrap their heads around it. So even our customers are still trying to figure it out, but they've decided to take action, and they're already taking action, and we're helping them understand the data that they've collected already, but then also guide what is the most important thing to do moving forward, so that they're really clear that what they're doing is meaningful.
You said you translate this data and you help businesses kind of understand it. Do you also offer them like advice or solutions, ways to kind of act on the data and maybe
Oh,
fix some of the
absolutely.
problems that they're seeing?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think this is something that's quite different that we do, compared to, say, other biodiversity platforms that really focus on providing metrics, which I see as the first step. But we go beyond the metrics, and that's a core part of what we do. And this gets down to the species. So we go full circle back to biodiversity, if you like. The word is used a lot, but species are often forgotten, and it kind of blows my mind, because that is what biodiversity is. The core unit of biodiversity is a species. And so if you understand what species are at or in the surrounding area of your business location, then you immediately have more insight on what will be most effective to do on the ground to enhance it or to control it, or what have you. If it's an invasive species, you might want to control it. And so that gives you the insight, so we can provide guidance on what methods could you use to not just enhance this one species, but what we really want to do is enhance the functionality of the whole ecosystem. So what are the key species that we could focus on that give you the maximum return for all species, and really guide, what is it? And businesses often talk about, return on investment. And I think this is a return on investment in terms of resilience for the business, but also in terms of species for biodiversity. So that is a key part, and we're building an some AI that really helps accelerate that. It's a special tool that can be used that looks at the networks and functionality between species at any particular site in the world, and is able to analyze which connections are going to give you the best return for biodiversity and for your business. So it's a pretty exciting time, because I feel like our clients are working at massive scales, like millions and millions of hectares just for one client, and we can help create positive change across that landscape. So we have a goal of, reaching 10 billion hectares of positive change as a first step. And I think we can definitely achieve that if we work together with some of these really amazing leading businesses in the world.
Yeah. Well, this is a huge, complicated problem that I wouldn't even know where to start with. So I'm glad we have smart people like you working on it. And for people who maybe want to get into this field and kind of do what you're doing, or work on in biotech of some kind, or biodiversity in general, what advice would you offer those folks?
Um, I think if you have an idea of something new and innovative, go and explore it. Find your local innovation ecosystem. There are these hubs of communities out there. I discovered my local one, and it really was a springboard for me to embark on this journey into nature technology. And that is often a really inspiring thing. Like, you just find these people who are interested in new ideas, and it can be really uplifting. I also think that just doing something in your local area can also be just as impactful for particular things. And so that, there's working in the space, but there's also, everyone can contribute to restoring nature, or and protecting or enhancing nature, whether it be actually going out and doing a bird survey, or like having an app that identifies the birds for you, but you can see them like in real time, depending on where you are in the world. And that actually gets saved, and it adds to the knowledge base that everybody can access. And so, like our team, for example, we all have bird detectors. We all work remotely, but we're right across Eastern Australia, and so we all have bird detectors, and we can. There's some species that migrate like between us, and so we can add that data to the global pool of data just by using these devices, which are now really accessible for people, and can contribute to science at a massive scale and informed decision making, which I think is really powerful.
Very cool. Yeah, lots of ways to get involved. And then, I mean, you kind of touched on this a bit, but for the average person, what can they do to help support biodiversity in general?
Yeah, look, I think everyone should leverage the skills that they have. So, there might be, I know that, for example, because I previously worked with drones and sensors and things, I can fly drones. And so I actually go to my local reserve, and they do lots of restoration work, and I wanted to help them with the monitoring. So I'll actually go out and take drone footage of the area and show changes over time, and analyze that data for them. Other people might be more, have skills in terms of organisation. And I think if there's a local volunteer group, they can always do with a hand to coordinate other people to get involved and to get out and to record things, to capture data, or to help plant trees or weed invasive species like you have as well. I think there's always a local initiative that you can join. But even closer to home, I feel like you can have your native bee hotel, homemade job, do it with the kids. That's what we have out the back with bits of bamboo and wood and clay and holes. And you know what? It's full every single season now. And we have this diversity of species in our backyard. So whether it's collecting data, building bee hotels, or going out and helping in your local nature reserve, I think there's always a plethora of things you can do to help give you hope, by contributing to the bigger picture.
Yeah, I've been seeing insect hotels pop up just in parking lots and parks around Ireland, and it's so fun because it's just this tiny little structure in the corner, but you can tell like people are starting to think about these things, and even if it's an old log or something, just leave it in the ground on the ground. That can do a lot for
Oh,
nature as well.
absolutely.
Just like leaving
Yeah,
things. Everything doesn't have to be clean.
absolutely.
Okay, well, if folks want to learn more about any of this, or maybe there's something that's inspired you, what resources would you share for people looking to get into this more?
Yeah, well, you can find out more about the work that we're doing at naturehelm.com. And there's also other things like, there's some really cool podcasts, I think, that also can be quite inspiring. There's one that I have also participated in before called Rewildology, and it's a really it's talking about rewilding the world, but through storytelling, experiences, and action. And so it's like it's nature, but it's more about people's experiences of it and things like that. So I think seeking out resources like that, or if people are interested in the nature positive movement, there is a more recent initiative that has come about called the Nature Positive Initiative. So it's quite easy to remember. And this is an organisation that is really trying to harmonise all the different metrics. Like there's just so many metrics out there, and it's really overwhelming. And so they've actually pulled together all the different players and are coming up with a really concise set of indicators that businesses and other organisations can use to try and track change over time at scale. And so people might be interested in looking that up. There's lots of different white papers and things like that that can be found to kind of see what is at the cutting edge of being part of this business transformation, if you like, this business nature transformation that is happening all around the world. So that might provide some nice resources too.
Perfect. And we will link to all this in the show notes, of course, so you can refer back to that. I guess we will move on to our Green Life Hacks portion of the show, where we each give one thing that folks can do if you're looking to live more sustainably. And you've given a ton of ideas already, Debbie, but do you have one thing that you would offer someone who's like maybe overwhelmed and just wants to get started on their sustainability journey?
Well, I guess for me, one thing that I've done at home is I really didn't want to use pesticides in my yard, and so I had some pest problems in my fruit trees, and I did some research on that. It was like a coddling moth that was getting into my cherry trees, and I found out that if you have chickens scratching around the base of your cherry trees over the winter time when the pupae are in the soil, you no longer have coddling moth. And I got chickens, and I've never had coddling moth since. So that was fantastic. But then I also had other insects that were eating my seedlings whenever I planted them, slaters and earwigs and things like this. And the chickens didn't seem to really like the slaters. So I'm like, useless chickens. Not useless, but I needed something else. And so I actually then got some ducks. And I found out some ducks that like to eat slaters and muscovy ducks. And we then got a couple of muscovy ducks. So we have the ducks that eat the slaters and the snails, and the chickens that eat the earwigs and the coddling moth. And together they are our organic pest control in our backyard. And now my seedlings grow and my fruit grows. And I've just got to stop all those parrots from eating eating the flowers before they become fruit. So I've got to get creative this spring because my trees have just started blooming. I need to find a way to protect the trees and the crop, but maybe allow for the wildlife to have a certain portion of it. That's my goal for this spring.
You have a proper petting farm going on, just trying to control your pests there. But yeah,
I am just in the suburbs, but it is a reasonable size block.
Well, it's a creative way to address a problem that most people would go find a chemical for,
Yeah, well, it's great. It's fun, watching them around the yard, and they eat all our veggie scraps too. So it's a good win-win, and we get eggs as well.
Yes, the eggs are probably great. Well, yeah, mine, similarly, I was trying to think of something to do with the theme of the show, biodiversity. And I know you've mentioned this a few times already, but and I think I've actually used this before, but I think it's worth repeating, is maybe getting involved with a local citizen science initiative or other group that's doing work that promotes local ecosystems or the health of a waterway or something like that. There's no shortage of groups doing this work, as you mentioned, and just look in your local community and see what's being done already, and if nothing is being done, maybe think of starting something. But even if you're counting birds or bats or going on, I know there's places you can help salamanders cross the road and turtles and things, get in the ocean, like where I lived in Texas. So there's all sorts of fun things you can do that's like rewarding and interesting and makes you feel good as well. So
yeah, and it helps to connect you to your community as well. So you
yeah.
have that greater sense of the social element of it as well. Can be really important, I think, for in particular more elderly people that maybe might not have as much physical ability to get out and do other things, but can always contribute in different ways to these as well.
Yeah, great point. Definitely a great way to connect with the community and be a part of something bigger. So
Yep, definitely.
Well, Debbie, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge. One more time, where can we find you and or NatureHelm online?
Yes, you can just look up naturehelm.com.
Perfect. And
You
all
can
the
search for my
socials
name.
and everything.
You can search for my name. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can search for us online. And LinkedIn is probably the main social media thing that I do. But we do also have some Instagram and YouTube, but they're kind of in early stages at this point. So yeah, LinkedIn is definitely where I'm most active at the moment.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Well,
you're welcome to reach out to me if you hear this podcast. I'd love to hear from you.
yeah, and we'll link all of that as well in the show notes with everything else. You can
Fabulous.
find me personally on Instagram, Blue Sky, and here on Sustainably Geeky at Het's Gonna Be Me. And then the show, as I mentioned at the top, on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So, again, if you want to support our work, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee and search Sustainably Geeky. We appreciate you listening, and everyone listening, have a great rest of your day.